labor force, that they have to take labor, cheaper and cheaper labor from the surrounding territory, and make all the Palestinians into little Israeli slaves. And with this, there is already a problem involved. But if they then suddenly cut it off in a punitive type of action, then they are starving to death. The issue with the Gaza Strip was that Hamas had made a deal with the Israelis that the Israelis would move out. But the Israelis kept all the entrances to the Gaza Strip. What kind of a sovereign unit is that when all the entrances are occupied by a foreign army? So against that pressure there, where they could control, where the Israelis controlled all the entrances and so on, they sent these miserable rockets. They are rockets from Russia. You can shoot them, but you cannot steer them. You never know where the hell they are flying. Most of them flying into cactuses or whatever. It's highly ineffective, the whole thing. It is just a symbolical type of a thing that you say, you cheated us. You said you would set us free, and now you enslave us by keeping all these entrances. And so then they made this attack. They made this attack because we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because we had saturation bombing there, in which 10,000 of civilians were killed, and none of us was ever before a military tribunal. And because we gave the Israelis in 5 wars their weapons and so on against the Palestinians and so on. That is the account. That's why it's done. At least one has to consider this. One cannot simply start, like with Adam and Eve or whatever, with the September 11th or whatever. One has to see what led to September 11th. Because then you can also argue that in the last 8 years or whatever, maybe 10 years when we look forward, that the reasons for this lex talionis or jus talionis, that means the retaliation, have become more intense. At that time, the 1 million Iraqis was not dead yet. But now they are dead, and they don't forget anything. People in Eastern Europe don't forget anything. People in the Near East don't forget anything. I was in Belgrade when the civil war started, and I went through the streets and I talked with the Serbs, and the Serbs said, now we have the opportunity to deal with the battle of the Valley of the Blackbirds. I didn't even know who the hell these blackbirds were. But then I found out in 1390 or whatever, the Turks had marched up into Serbia and somehow had beaten up the Serbs in the valley. And that had still to be taken care of. Now that was about 700 years earlier. And now the time had come to make that, put that straight and so on. So when Saddam Hussein was killed, people were still outside and took an oath that this would be revenged, and if it would take 3, 4, 5, or 6 generations. So when one sees this, and has at the same time in the Christian faith community the 4th commandment of the Sermon on the Mount, the old people said eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Don't do that, Put up the other cheek, and if a soldier comes and lets you carry the weapons for 1 mile, carry it for 2 miles. And if somebody takes your jacket, then give him your shirt on top of it and so on. That means take the first step and relax and, break the spell of this revenge and so on. Sometimes one thinks, that Christians do not only not listen to that, I have the feeling sometimes that they hate these texts, that they hate them unconsciously. And so therefore self-reflection would really be very important, that when Jesus teaches us love or justice or peace, what is really going on with the killer instinct in us? It is unconscious to a large extent, but simply silently not to listen to all of that and to push it aside for 8 years and go through one election after the other and do the criminal thing once and again and again. I mean, this is all not normal. This is not a normal situation, by all psychoanalytical standards, and certainly not by any theological standards, which, by the way, at this moment may even agree. So so we can, if we reflect on these 12 days and the attacking of a UN school where refugees had withdrawn, attack of UN hospitals and so on, in an unbelievable murderous brutality, you know. And we are standing by, and we are not using our power in the Security Council or whatever. I mean, as if the president had this ambition, you know, to commit a last crime, as long as he had still the opportunity before he would go out. And why is this passivity there? You know, why are we not standing up and say something? We can do that. We did it, you know. The Vietnam War, not that it helped very much, but at least we did it. Okay, so events, you know, that what we call time diagnosis, and so we had two of them, and the Gaza Strip issue, and we can approach it, you know, from a religious side. Thomas More talks a lot about religion and its role in the secular society. So there are Muslims involved there. But in the same territory, there are Christian Palestinians. You know, I have a Christmas thing there with little camels and all that, and I bought that from Christian Palestinians. They are all over the place. So the Gaza Strip is also secular people, humanist people, and that we know what Hamas is or what the Hezbollah is. They are Muslim. They're not terrorists. They may commit terrorist acts. So do we. But you cannot always call them now all terrorists. There are other things too than terrorists. They are socialists. They are loved by their people because they bring money. God knows where they get it from. And that's the only money which they very often have, because if they don't do slave labor in Israel, then they have nothing to eat or whatever. So the Hezbollah and the Hamas, you know, spreads all kinds of charitable monies and activities and so on, and of course they vote for them. What do we expect? And then if somebody comes democratic in, we say democracy, we want to bring democracy to the East, then they have democracy suddenly, but we don't like that democracy, but it brings the wrong people in. So, I mean, if you are for democracy, you have to accept them too if you don't like their faces now. Or we should stop that democracy stupid talk, and should say, whoever serves our capitalistic interests, no matter if he's a dictator or democracy, that's okay. No, that is the criterion. Then we should say, not Christianity, not democracy is our real criterion, but capitalism, the private ownership of the means of production, and so on, and cheap labor and cheap resources. That's what we are really about. Then let's be honest about it, and that will be psychologically very healthy when we are honest about it. So. This, you know, what's just the second thing about the what we want to do to apply that stuff here to real events. So, and then of course the inauguration of the president, that we are sensitive enough, as Thomas More was, you know, if religion is used in the public sphere, if it is really used in an honest way or dishonest. The president takes Lincoln's Bible and puts his hand on it and takes an oath. If he had for a moment opened, you know, the president was not always a Christian. Obama became a Christian in the streets of Chicago when he worked with the churches in the slums of Chicago as a community organizer. He had a conversion. He didn't have a drinking problem than the other one, but he converted because he saw the poverty of the people and saw what religious people did, identifying with the poor and so on. And that convinced him. That's a good reason for conversion. So now, but if he had looked into that Bible, and I don't know how well he knows it and so on, there is the third commandment. The old people say, keep your oath. I tell you, don't take any oath. Say yes, yes, no, no. What is more than that is from the evil one, from Satan, from Beelzebub, from the devil. Don't do it. Well, he does it, and he does this devilish thing, while at the same time the book is closed. He does the exact opposite of what the book says. And that is what they do in all courtrooms. And then they say on top of it, we are a Christian country. This is idiotic. So therefore, to become sensitive for this, you know, we are not a Christian country, we are not a religious country, we have never been a religious country, The fathers of the Constitution said it clearly that this is not a Christian country. The Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, was built on French Enlightenment, on the encyclopedists, and it's a wonderful constitution. It has no word about God in it, on purpose, because of the abuse of religion again and again in the old countries and here and so on. And we have the name of God in the Declaration, in the Declaration of Independence, but it is not the God of Judaism. It's not the God of Christianity. It's not the Trinity. It's not Jesus. It is not Allah. It is a bourgeois construct by Voltaire and by Rousseau of a God who has created the world and then left it, and for all practical purposes this world is godless and God is worldless, and in this godless world the bourgeois character can do whatever he wants to in order to get cheaper labor and cheap resources and so on, as they do everywhere and have done for the last 400 years. So this sensitivity is very important, and it would be also be healthy, so we can say that Jefferson said, of course, the Americans should read the Bible. But then he said, why? Because then we can govern them better. That means the bourgeoisie can govern the masses, the 180 million, better when they, the 180 million, read the Bible, but not those who rule them. So that we then have a secular bourgeois ruling class and then feed the masses religion in these television stations there with these hallelujah singers all day long, with the fundamentalists and so on. So that, but I mean, if one listens to Jefferson, the Americans should read the Bible. Why? So that we can rule them better. That means if they read the Bible, they will not join a labor union. Then they will not strike. Then we can do with it whatever we want to. Now, that is not what Jesus had in mind. That's not what Muhammad had in mind. That's not what Moses had in mind, who slaughtered an Egyptian supervisor and then liberated the slaves. It's all upside down, the whole thing. So, nevertheless, also, whoever, if you are critical, we also have to be critical of the critics. And critique is not something nasty. It's not an expression that one is in a bad mood or whatever. Critique means to differentiate. It means to emancipate. It means to make things good, which have gone wrong, and so on. So very often we say, when we are married, we say, don't be so negative. And so there is some bad thing about being negative. But to face negative things is to face the killer instinct in us is the first presupposition that we can do something about it. If we keep it unconscious, look at the culture alone. It's a culture of death, as the Pope said. There is the Vietnam Wars, there are the Iraq Wars, there are the police movies, there are the First World War still movies, Second World War movies. I mean, I don't know the percentage, Walter is the greatest statistician over there, he can tell you what the percentage of these death thing, and the other one, the other side is, there's the libido, the sexual instinct, which is as unconscious as the other one is. So, in a certain sense, we are the most over-sexed porno country. The porno industry brings almost as much money as the drug industry and the armament industry. And on the other hand, we reject Freud because he talks too much about sex, and thereby get rid of the only people, intelligent people, who could help it in this mess. And the same thing, with economics. We are concerned with consumption and with production and with profit, and then we blame Marx because he talks about economics too much. And then when we are in a miserable crisis, we don't even have his crisis theory, which could bring some clarity into the whole mess. This is all not, it will not. It will only when the head stinks, when it stinks in the head, then it will be on the street. And that would be very horrible for my children. I have 14 grandchildren, and so that would be solidarity with the future. But then there's also solidarity with the past, with all those who have suffered from this already, and then the solidarity with those who are suffering that now, look on the other side of the railroad station here, the north side down there, to go into these houses, what that looks like, the beds and so on. There were times when I could go down there and could give speeches and so on. In the meantime, I cannot even dare to do that anymore. So, nevertheless, that is our concern with these contemporary issues, and we can stop there with this, and so that you can break in wherever you want to when I talk and when we see something, and so that we have changed it always from a lecture into a discourse and back to a lecture again or whatever. But the more discourse we have, and the more you express your own concerns, the better it would be. And we are not, so like in a lecture hall where we have to stick, to a plan or whatever. We are much freer here. So whenever I say something which sounds a little bit kooky or so, or strange, or then you can, come in right away and can say, please clarify this a little bit, or you say this is not true, or the fundamental rules of a discourse is that when you feel what I say is not true really, factually, or when you feel that I'm not honest, that I, say this and mean something else, or that it's not rightful, so maybe what I said about private capitalism, that this is not right or ethical or whatever, and then tasteful and then understandable. So in the understandability is of course fundamental, because if what I say is not understood, or if we cannot understand what Thomas More says, then of course we cannot be critical if he says the truth, or if he's honest, or if he is rightful. So understandability is fundamental. Okay, do we have anything which we would like to comment on what I said, or any question which you may have? We want to have enough time for our movie.
Well, Dr. Siebert, with the Keith Olbermann presentation last night by the statesman from the scholar from the Brookings Institute, weighed in on the New Deal.
Yeah,
and
tell us about it.
Well, he said that the reason the New Deal failed us was because FDR caved. He gave in to the Republicans. He compromised himself and the program by letting them inch in with their ideology, their perspective. And that's why it stopped dead in its tracks in '37 with the recession.
Okay. Okay, very good. Now let's take that little piece of information up, and let's see how we can analyze that in the light of what we are reading, as far as Thomas More is concerned. Thomas More stands at the beginning of the capitalistic period. Before that we had feudal lords. Correct. The Eisenhower family came from the Bishop of Mainz. The Eisenhower family were serfs still of the Bishop of Mainz. They had to sneak out of Germany in the middle of the night. Masses of the people here were still in Europe not slaves, but serfs of feudal lords, bishops, secular feudal lords, and came here and then were capitalistic workers and so on. So therefore he stands at the beginning of the development of the capitalistic system. At that time it was very small, it evolved, became bigger, and now we have this huge ruling class of corporate ruling class which dominates the country and so on. Now, as far as the thinking of the people are concerned, the country was liberal. And it's not entirely, there is a great confusion in this country, which you can see every night when the news comes, what that really means. We say these people are on the right and these people are on the left. And the people on the left are the so-called Roosevelt liberals. And the people on the right are the neoliberals, the Chicago school and the Friedman school, and which came in under Nixon and Reagan and so on. People all thought that Friedman was a stupid type of a creature, and suddenly under Nixon and Reagan he became the church father of things. This is the guy who initiated this whole thing of privatization and policing and so on. So before, in the beginning, liberalism was Protestant, from the Calvinistic tradition. And from the very beginning it was atomistic, that means individual. the individual, the initiative of the individual. And then, of course, things like the secularization from Luther, secularization of occupations. Not only the priest has a profession, it is called by God, but the businessman is called too. And from the Calvinistic side, that there is determined from the beginning if we are saved or not. And when you are rich, that doesn't mean that your wealth brings you into heaven, but when you are rich, that means that this is a sign that God has chosen you from the beginning. When I was an exchange student here, I drove with a very rich guy along Central Park in New York, and we saw two beggars in the rain who were struggling with each other because one wanted to sleep on top and the other one on the bottom of the bench or whatever. And he looked out there, the rich guy, and said, you know, if God has forsaken them, what can we do about them? That means, you know, when you are rich, that is a sign that God has chosen you. When you are poor, that is a sign that God has forgotten you. And so this serves then not as a theological construct, but it becomes ideology. Ideology is false consciousness. It's the masking of class and national interests. It's a lie. It's the untruth. So the Protestant scheme became a bourgeois ideology. If God has lost them, then, you know, what can we do about them? And I wrote a whole chapter recently about New York, the capital of liberalism. You know what these creeps did? They built these skyscrapers. The winners built the skyscrapers, and what did they do with the losers? Then you have to go to Blackwell Island, which is now Roosevelt Island. And on these islands, they put the insane asylum with 1,200 women, where Dickens visited them and could not even look at it, so terrible it was. That's where they put the prisoners. And the prisoners took care of these insane women and so on. And then they put an orphanage there. And then they put a poorhouse there, all on the island. And then I went from that one island, and there are several of them, Hart Island and so on, all in the Hudson River and so on. And so they put all the trash of humanity on these islands there, while they build these skyscrapers. That is this atomistic thing, you see. It's the strong one goes ahead. Darwinism, social Darwinism came on top of it. And what do you do with the others? So liberalism is very good in order to maybe motivate people who are strong, you know. But it is helpless when collective problems come up, New Orleans or whatever. It simply doesn't know what to do. So when Roosevelt, who was the real last and ever great statesman of this country, heavyweight statesman, so when he came into the same crisis, 29, and Wall Street crashed and so on. Not so much as it crashed now, but it crashed really. So, and then it crashed, of course, several times in the next 10 years. So he could have done the same thing what Hitler did, what Mussolini did, what Salazar did, and so on. They asked for the emergency laws. And as soon as the president here asks for the emergency laws, he becomes a dictator. It was a Catholic, Father Cast, who, through the Center Party, gave Hitler the emergency laws and therefore made him legitimately a dictator. So if the bourgeoisie, they talk about dictators, every bourgeois state is just one step away from dictatorship. Namely, when the enemy moves into the country, or if you have a political disaster or economic disaster, then the president can ask for these rights. If Obama gets into a catastrophe, he will ask for the emergency laws. But the Patriot Act is already an actualization of the emergency laws to some extent. So, nevertheless, Roosevelt did not ask for the emergency laws, but he put up a brain trust. And in 1934, he gave a speech in which he used the word New Deal the first time. And the New Deal meant that they modified socially liberalism, that it wouldn't be so atomistic anymore. And they took that out of the social encyclical letter, Quadragesimo Anno. Quadragesimo Anno means 40 years. 40 years after the first social encyclical letter, which was called Rerum Novarum, new things are happening. That was in 1891, that was 50 years after Marx. The Catholic Church discovered that something was wrong with capitalism. Hallelujah. They are slow learners, but they did learn it finally. So, and we are happy that these social encyclical letters exist. But when I wanted to teach him in Baltimore, when I taught for the Jesuits said, don't teach him, you lose all your friends in Baltimore. Well, I did teach him anyway, and I didn't lose all my friends, but they were not taught here. They are not taught here. I'm the only one, I think, who taught them. Father Sirico has edited them, but he has, you know, done strange things to them. So I don't want to go into that, what he did with them for this institute in Grand Rapids. So nevertheless, so that was then enacted, and the Social Security was introduced. I mean, we have no idea what this country was like before Roosevelt, you know. But I mean, I went into 2 immigrant families, one in New York, the great-grandparents of my children, and one in Philadelphia, and so on. The guy in Philadelphia, he fought in the Union Army and was wounded several times, and then I think he deserted and went home to his 7 children. He finally worked in a mine operation, the West Virginia mining operation, which were in the same disastrous condition as they are now. Every few weeks you hear some news that some miners got lost again. So nevertheless, steel won into his stomach there, down 800 meters under the ground, and he died down there, and it was a family story that the mirror broke in the house at the moment where he died downstairs, and they brought him up. And there was the widow with 7 children, and there was no Social Security, and there was no pension, and the mining gangsters and so on, of course, didn't pay a thing, and how was she supposed to raise it? And that was in millions and millions of families and so on. So therefore, that was a revolutionary breakthrough under Roosevelt. Now, our issue today is the following one. At that time, capitalism was at its end. And Roosevelt, the bourgeois himself, he was in Germany a lot, he knew German well, so it was a middle to high bourgeois type of family from New York. And so he wanted to rescue capitalism, and the New Deal was the attempt, but the New Deal did not rescue capitalism. What it did was the war. With the war, suddenly everybody was employed, and of course a few million men were in the East and the West, in the army, and so that rescued capitalism. Now, what David just mentioned was that, what David said was that from this institute, somebody has the thesis that the New Deal at that time would have rescued capitalism. If not, the real liberals, who are not socially modified, would not have interfered and would have forced him to make compromises. Now, that would be very interesting to study this, because that has tremendous consequence for us, because we will have a New Deal tonight. They will vote for that New Deal with public works and so on and so on. And the question is, will that rescue capitalism? And if we could say it would have rescued it at that time, if that had not happened, we could say it will rescue us now if we do not allow the neoliberals, who have not modified it in terms of the subsidiarity principle from the Papal Encyclical letter, then it could rescue capitalism. Now, but this would have to be explored. But you see what little things, how important they are. If, as I think so far, that the New Deal did not have rescued the American capitalism if the war had not come, the conclusion will be that it will not rescue it now, no matter what we spend, if we do not get into another war. That means another world war or whatever. As Pentagon advisors, Huntington, for instance, thinks we will. Then, of course, capitalism will be rescued, but we may go under with it in the process. So because we have not only Christian bombs like the Trinity bomb, we have Islamic bombs in Pakistan and in India, and we have the bomb in South Africa, and we have the bomb in Jerusalem. So if there should be, like Huntington says, there should be a war of civilizations and so on, that would be an unbelievable, it would be an atomic war, a hydrogen bomb war, and that would be unfathomable. So therefore we should better not speculate with this, but rather say, will this New Deal, which they initiate tonight or tomorrow morning, will that rescue capitalism? Because as of now, it has come to its end, right? That means the federalization of all the banks and the industry will proceed. When after 2 or 3 years, maybe a certain stabilization will be achieved and the labor market will be down to 6% or whatever. we may have the temptation then to again and to depolice again. But if we do that, if we fall into this temptation, it will only dive deeper and deeper the next depression which will follow. Therefore, we would cut our pain in half if we would say it is just finished now. So let's go on with the federalization, and then let's make sure that we don't get into state capitalism or a fascist type of state capitalism, and keep a certain sector, a free sector, for smaller industries up to 250,000 or up to 1 million of McCain example, and there we leave this freedom where people will be cut off. After 250,000 they will not go any further. So, and thereby we would prevent, that this whole horror will happen again, where the whole country is kept hostage by maybe 1 million corporate leaders who are corrupt to the end and are not, first of all, shameless enough to ask the taxpayer to support them, and then even use that taxpayer money into the billions in order to build themselves houses or buy airplanes. The president stopped one bank to buy a $20 million airplane, which they had ordered already, and so on. But these are little things. So we should not be distracted by little symbolical actions like this. It is the whole class which has to disappear. If the American people are not strong enough to let them disappear in this crisis, they will have to do that in the next crisis. And then, when we say the state, the Americans have been conditioned somehow to think so highly of the businessman and so lowly of their government. How can they say that the businessmen will do it if he just made this mess? And the federal agents cannot do it. I mean, nobody can do it worse than what they did. Not even a federal agent can do it worse. What they will do now is they will put a federal agent into General Motors, into Chrysler, and so on, as they did in the Second World War. And the CEOs will have to go there every morning and ask the federal guy if they can proceed with these plans, and so on and so on. So hopefully the federal government will be strong enough. I was for the Clintons for a long time because I thought Obama was too good a man. The Clintons have this criminal streak which is necessary in order to deal with the ruling classes. I'm very sorry to say this. And in terms of Thomas More was a very pious man, but he was also a very realistic man, and he knew about the satanic elements which are in the state and in the business world and so on. So we can learn that from him, because to be realistic and at the same time not being contemptuous. The great thing of Freud, for instance, is that he knows us into the depth of our basement, which is not a very pleasant thing to look at. At the same time, he does not hold us in contempt. And the same thing is true for Marx, who looked into the basement of a capitalistic society and is hellish, but he did not hold people in contempt. He kept both of them, were enlightened about the hellishness of human beings, but at the same time were respectful for that what is good in us at the same time. And to balance these two things, that is a very complicated act. Okay, do we have any other question? Yes.
Just your reflection on it.
Yeah.
Before the election, one Sunday, all over the country, priests spoke about who you're going to vote for. They stopped short of naming names, but at friends from various parts of the country where their priest was not like Father Ken. It was a lot more strident, and they all but said who they need to vote for. And it was not Obama. Then I have a friend who's a vice principal at a Catholic school in South Carolina, and she had an Obama sticker on her bumper, and her Monsignor came and said, if you don't take that off, I'll have to go to the bishop and discuss this with him. And so, so I sit in church on Sunday, sometimes guilty about sitting there under such a church hierarchy.
That's right.
And so, you talk about we need to face up to some guilt and the contradictions that we experience every day in the moment. So I don't know if you can.
Yeah, well, that's very good. My son, in Pennsylvania, experienced something. There's a bishop who visits us here all the time, and he had the same experience. Something has gone wrong that means something has gone wrong in terms of the theology of the church, because these bishops are in communion with the Bishop of Rome. And that is the difference, you know. The Anglican bishop here is not in communion with the Bishop of Rome. These bishops who said this there, they are. So it was not all the bishops, but there were few of them who would say that who votes, you know, for this person will go to hell. They said that they go to hell, you know. So now, the previous pope who has died has already made it very clear, and unfortunately they talk this legal language, or this philosophical language. They said what is formal in a platform, in a political platform, that counts. Not all the other material elements. What that means is a politician can have as the formal, the constitutive element of his platform, peace or social justice or something like that. But he may at the same time have things like gay marriage or abortion or whatever. By the way, how they express this, you know, there are the people for abortion, against abortion. There's nobody for abortion. There are people for choice, and they wish that they make the right choice, but they do not want to criminalize them when they do the wrong choice or whatever. So this has not been fairly expressed. But the important thing is that there can be material things in the platform which are subordinated under the formal principle of the platform. Let's see, justice and so on. And you can go along with that, according to the Pope, even when there are some other things which you don't like. Now that would have made the scene very clear, and some of these bishops simply did not obey this. So that made just their own
So you
way.
feel that was not necessarily in alignment with the Pope's?
No, it was not. It was expressively against him. And the individual bishop can have his theological opinions, but an opinion counts for nothing. You see, up there is the dogma which counts for all of them. You exclude yourself if you are against it. And the theological opinions have the least probability, the least truth element in them. So he can express his opinions or so, but you know, he should justify them, how that fits together, what Rome says. And they are in the bind. There's a very conservative St. Augustine church here, you know, and they are in the bind. They have people who fight in Iraq. They fight in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And so what should the Monsignor say? The Monsignor was originally a Jew, then a Protestant, and then a Catholic, and then a Catholic priest. So he has gone through a lot. But so he knows that the war is unjust by the 7-point just war theory of Augustine, according to the Pope and 25 churches of the World Council. But he cannot say this to his community. So he says, well, that is the opinion of the Bishop of Rome. Well, yes, it is his opinion, but is it to be taken serious now or not taken serious, you know? I mean, the Pope's idea about negative birth control is also an opinion. It is not infallible by the definition of the Church. It has never been made a dogma. So therefore it is just an opinion. Well, I can lower everything what the Pope says into an opinion, but that would not be expressed the Catholic attitude, you know. These opinions are supposed to be taken seriously. It is not a dogma that the Iraqian war is an unjust war, but it is an opinion, you know, of the middle range, you could say. The Pope is quite sure, and both popes consistently have said that these two wars are unjust because they were not established by the right authority, because of the high casualties, civilian casualties, because of the means are not adequate to the goals, because there was no guarantee that the war could be won. Now both of them are lost. So this, you know, that is to be taken seriously, and it's sad to see this. And there is also honesty, you know. If they cannot agree with the Bishop of Rome, then they should get out. That's what the Anglicans did. That's what the Baptists did. You know, that what millions of people did who are not in communion with the Bishop of Rome anymore. But if they are, you know, then they should at least take it seriously. So this is a very disappointing type of a thing, you know. And then the Bishops' Conference would be responsible for that. The Bishops' Conference should have said something. We have 3 or 4 members who have another opinion, you know. But that is not the opinion of the Bishops' Conference. So that, you know, and if there is a decree, the Bishops' Conference is more important than these 2 or 3 bishops in Pennsylvania who make up their own mind, you know. If you have one theologian who is on your side, you can resist the Church's authority. If your conscience says something else, you have to follow your conscience according to Catholic teaching. You will be judged on Judgment Day, not according to the teaching of the Church, but according to your own conscience. Thomas Aquinas. They repressed it for 700 years, and then they brought it up again with the birth control issue. And it stands now. So, therefore, it was very sad that in both elections that came up. But I think then one should say, this is what the Bishop of Rome says, this is what the Bishops' Conference says, which is an agreement with the Bishop of Rome, and also with about 25 churches of the World Council of Churches. So that is to whom do you follow now? You know, or you have these 3 bishops who, you know, have another opinion, and dare to tell people that if they would vote for this, they would go to hell. I mean, where the hell do they know this from? And the laity, you know, should of course also be more mature and better educated so that they do not fall for these things. You have to be, you know, critical against worldly authorities and against ecclesiastical authorities as well. Unfortunately, churches can get sick. Churches can get pathological. And the individuals, you know, have to be educated that they know how to deal with these sicknesses and with this criminality, which happens too. Father Sirico is a case here. He recommended the assassination of Chavez in Venezuela, and I went to the tribunal and I said that I don't know anything in the New Testament or in the natural law, the Codex Ius Canonici, which allows a priest to recommend in public the assassination of a head of state. But you see, the bishop is in a horrible bind there. This is where the money comes. If he fires Sirico, as he has been fired in Grand Rapids already, and by the Paulist fathers, you know, the money doesn't come anymore. Now the money doesn't come anyway anymore because the contract has been dissolved by the federal government. So I think that what we are doing here, you know, to strengthen the laity in the church, to produce some kind of a critical public opinion in the church, and not develop an authoritarian personality in an authoritarian outfit, because Roman Catholicism has become very authoritarian. We have in the Protestant churches, we have the fundamentalists and the liberals. We have a very traditionalist Orthodox church, where I just was in Russia. But the characteristic of the Roman Catholic Church is a strong authoritarianism. Father says, sister says, and so on. It wasn't that way all the time, but became that way under the pressure of the Reformation and under the pressure of liberalism in the 19th century, where they thought they had to pull everything together and made the Pope infallible in 1870 out of an attempt to rescue the Church. But this is not how the Church can be rescued. I think the individual believers must become independent in their thinking. Loyal, you know, if I'm loyal to the Bishop of Rome, and I have good reasons to be loyal, but when the Bishop of Rome would say a thing which is wrong, if he makes a concordat with Hitler, if he makes a concordat with Salazar, with every fascist on earth, then we have to do what Paul did against Peter, where he said, I withstood him in his face. When suddenly, you know, he fell short of when he went back again to the Jewish dietary laws and so on. So this freedom, you know, if that was in the church, the Protestant deviation would have been unnecessary.